Right, thank you for waiting, for those who've been there for a couple of minutes, and welcome again to everyone for joining today's webinar around data modernisation with Azure. For those just attended, if you didn't catch the message, please take a moment, just grab that QR code. It'll help us with understanding a bit about what we're doing, and just to bring that on screen, we've got so look. Some results coming through shortly, but just understand, I guess, whether you're using cloud, what sort of providers you're using, what your database technologies are, and what are you looking to get out of today's session. So that'll be quite helpful. We've got six responses come through, so thank you very much. We'll flick back to this during the session to get a feel for where you're at as well. So the other little bit of housekeeping before we kick into gear is you would have received an email, a reminder email this morning, and it's got a link to a lab we're going to be working in the second half of today's session. If you haven't activated it, that's okay. Just take a moment now as we go through introductions, just to fill in your name and details. It will take work, taking up to half an hour, but I think Microsoft have now pre-provisioned all those, so it should be ready only in a few minutes, and we'll have a time at the break as well if you have any troubles getting that going, or please use the Q&A in the Teams chat, and our team will be able to assist you with this as well. So my name is Peter Hayden. I'm the Solutions Lead at Data3 for data analytics, and my role is to work with clients like yourself and helping understand what you can do with the data analytics space. And today we're certainly focusing on the modernisation, and we'll talk about some of the approaches we use and why that's important. Accompanying me today in the room but off camera is Joe Lynn. Say hi, Joe.
Hi everyone.
So Joe is our technical consultant at Data3 and leads our team in the technical delivery space. I've also got joining us in the room Marcel Mascunin. Say hi, Marcel.
Good morning everyone. I will moderate your questions today, so please do not hesitate to post any questions during the sessions in the Q&A screen on the right hand side of your view.
Lovely, thanks Marcel. So a bit about today, we're coming across the country from a range of different time zones, so hopefully, apologies to those in Western Australia, not too early for you. We've got a 4 hours booked for today. The first half, with a 3-minute break in that 4 hours time slot. First half, we'll be going through what we call data journey map, which is really how we think about data analytics here at Data3. And we then think of going to why we want to think about modernisation with data. So the first half is a bit about theory, to the tools and frameworks, technologies available to you, and we'll do a whiteboard section on what a data migration strategy you might want to consider. It feeds into a plan. We'll have time for Q&A during that time as well, and then we've got a special offer I want to just sort of share with those on today's session as well. In the second half, so it should take about 90 minutes thereabouts, and then we'll take that break. And then in the second half, we'll have a hands-on lab, and during the hands-on lab, we've got a range of exercises that is really that you get hands-on with modernising and going through a scenario, taking a database that's hosted in SQL 2008 R2, VM, say maybe on premises data center, and taking that to Azure as well. So that's we'll kick it off together, but we'll be self-guided. But Joe and I will be here to help support you during that. If after the time we've got together you want to do the other exercises, about 6 all up, I think, or 6 or 8 from memory, then you're welcome to do the others. But the 3 we picked out are really focused on doing an assessment of the database, helping you migrate, doing a migration, and then looking at the security posture, which is probably very relevant for the session topic and maybe considerations where you are today. So the data journey map is the framework we use at Data3 to think about where you are in your journey with data. And we consider the 4 paths of data, information, knowledge, and intelligence, and the capability and maturity in each of those areas. To help sort of provide a little more colour to that, when we talk about the data path, we're thinking about the data foundations, and that's where all of you will have data of some kind, or you probably wouldn't be in business, and that's where your database is stored right now. And really the focus of today's session is really that data foundations layer, about how we think about using cloud as a way to modernise our data estate and have the right foundations going forward. That's an enabler for downstream capabilities in the modern data platform, modern analytics, and the AI-enabled applications layers. And as we go through the data journey, as you go through your own data journey, you start thinking about capabilities such as data warehousing and data quality, data modelling, and that modern data platform piece. Reporting and analytics comes out in the modern analytics and knowledge path. And all that's a precursor to doing a lot of intelligence around machine learning, virtual agents, and so on. And not to say that this is a one-time event, it is iterative in nature, and you can do analytics without having a data warehouse. So it is around finding the right capabilities you need to address, but then growing where you need to provide scale, performance, the right sort of capabilities to help support that as well. Now, around that is the right planning and management support, and governance is important. If we step back from the sort of the technical implementations we think about in those outcomes, we want to consider what those organisational opportunities are. And we'll talk about this a bit more during our whiteboarding session. But when we want to consider the organisational opportunities, we think about your customers. So what are your customers really trying to achieve, and how do you improve that interaction with your customers? Your employees, very similar. How do we empower your employees, increase their productivity? What opportunities are there? And we talk about these organisational opportunities. We're thinking about transformation objectives. It might be business strategy that you will have been tasked with as part of your role to help your organisation in some way. It also includes improving your operations, optimising those, and also then augmenting products and services to take advantage of data in new and creative ways. On the other side of unfinished this chart, unfinished data journey map, we then have those measurable outcomes around business growth, which might be service levels, or might be profit or revenue, managing your operations for efficiency, the compliance requirements, and the risk and safety are important too, as well as that business agility. That's also key. And understanding those organisational opportunities and the business outcomes really makes then what needs to happen in the middle part, on those four paths, fairly straightforward. We can be quite understanding what those capabilities need to be. And some of those capabilities I've talked through already, through stages 2 to 5 in this diagram, which is the solutions or capabilities you want to consider. It is around building out that sort of capability in those areas. And while that's really, really good to consider, we will be focusing today on the one in stage 2 in the middle there, which is around that data estate modernisation and migration to Azure. But afterwards, happy to engage on any of the topics that may be of interest to you as well. The last bit of a piece of our, I guess, when we think about data with our clients, we have developed the modern data landscape. And the modern data landscape is our deeper dive again from our data journey map to the capability areas. Actually, now what services do we want to turn on? What functions and features do we need to deploy? Again, we're focusing on the data sources layer right at the bottom there and getting those right. But it might also mean having those maybe modernizing that to the cloud. Beyond that, though, it's an enabler and having that right to be able to do the integration, the data source processing to enable analytics, visualizations, data science, intelligent systems, and so on. And most importantly, we are considering our business users and what they need to do, aligned to those opportunities and outcomes, as well as the technical roles to support that. And the last piece of this really is then that cross-layer capabilities, which are the non-technical pieces around governance, data quality, and data security that we need to consider as part of our modern data landscape as well, and equally as important to make sure we get success out of those niches we deploy. Cool. Thank you, Marcel. So let's go deep dive now into the data modernisation and provide an overview in terms of what we're going to be exploring today. So when we think about organisations at the moment, the economic pressures are at the top of mind, particularly as it comes to 2021. We've seen a move to remote work in the last year, and migrating workloads is becoming important as some businesses have had to scale up or change the way they operate as well, and reinvent and reimagine themselves. So as we go, we sort of return to work, and we're lucky in Australia to be able to be doing that. We are thinking about, well, how do we manage our costs? That's going to be given any impacts we've had to our organisations in the last year. What can we do to optimise that? New security threats in the market as well. How do we manage those? If we have a similar event, the business continuity. For those who are in Queensland, it is 10 years almost from 2 weeks ago that we had the floods in Brisbane, and business continuity plans got tested very heavily in the city, and we didn't have a lot of the cloud technology we have today to be able to do that. So we need to rethink about business continuity as well, and then how we scale our organisations as we pivot and transform and now try and do new things using technology and data. Then the ability to modernise our data estate becomes critical. So a lot of questions come top of mind around being prepared for what's next. How will our staff adapt to change? How can we cater for future disruption to our organisations? And some of the triggers that are causing this is around changes where organisations are changing their financial justification and needing to flip to say OPEX type of measures as well. Change the cash flow, budget pressures are really having an impact on IT and how we can ensure business continuity and also business operations right now. And some of those here on the screen are included, and there's scales. This is one we've seen as well. We're scale. We've got a new application. We've gone digital. How can we scale that up without disruption to our business, which is our current data centre? So there's a lot of sort of chatter at the moment around this, and this forms a cornerstone of being able to achieve a lot of that application innovation as well. Broadly speaking, and this is pre-pandemic around what are those overall modernisation migration triggers, which is centred around why I guess clients choose to go to the cloud and why migrate at all. And there's some real sort of tactical sort of pieces here around, well, data centres our support, or our software our support, or we're due for a refresh, or we've got major capacity issues that are reactionary, and we need to sort of think about and consider that what's going to happen. If we just flip back to the survey for a moment, so thank you for those responses we've received. I was intrigued when we run these sessions to see whether there's anyone running SQL 2008, 2002, or even 2005. So we do have that comes into that end of support. How do we think about using what we need to do with those databases as well to provide, sure that we continue to provide the application support we need to. Then there's more strategic things we need to think about as well. It's around compliance or new applications integrate, security threats or innovation with apps as well. So there's all these things sort of lend itself to why we need to modernise. So why customers choose to migrate overall comes down to how we optimise our cost. Can we do things in new ways that breaks that regular 3, 4, 5 year cycle of data centre refreshes, hardware, and then the build process and deployments and so on. With cloud and with Azure Cloud, you pay for what you use. There's a lot of automated admin built in, and a lot of the optimization happens behind the scenes using machine learning and of course the threat detection as well, which is that risk mitigation. How do you keep on top of that and have that managed for you? And one thing I like about when we talk about modernising our data estate in particular is that the options we have available to us means that a modernisation to Azure becomes the last upgrade you need to do, because the platforms are now evergreen, and it frees up your IT teams from having to do patching and maintenance and so forth. All that happens for you now. So there are some great benefits. I know I certainly don't miss having to do patching every time a security update comes out, or simply updates to the product as well. And like we saw in the modern data landscape, in the data journey map, the innovation that can come from having our data modernised to Azure unlocks a lot of value for you and your organisation. Not only is it around the analytics space, also to use that machine learning, so predictive work you can do. It could be around the apps you want to be able to do and how you scale that. We'll talk about some of those modernisation patterns shortly. I'm going to take you through two customer examples. These are Microsoft customer examples that have gone through the modernisation process. The first is Allscripts, and they had a challenge around needing to consolidate a lot of data, particularly a lot of acquisition activity they've had. And they modernised about 600 SQL servers on VMs using their existing SQL licenses into Azure. And what a lot of clients may not be aware of is when looking at retail prices for in the Azure calculator around a SQL VM, is that you can use what's called Azure Hybrid Benefit to offset some of that cost using your existing SQL licensing and taking it to the cloud. So and that's how Allscripts are able to save up to 82%. And you'll see some other numbers come through, and you'll hear Azure Hybrid Benefit a few times during the first session this morning. But yes, able to then provide that scalability, a good outcome for Allscripts. We've got customer links to these as well that Marcel will post in the chat window for you also. The second one here is Komatsu, and they achieved not only through modernisation, bringing their data together in one spot to then use that data in new and creative ways, including predictive maintenance, but the consolidation, cost gave them overall running costs of almost half by also giving them a 25-30% performance boost. And there's a video on this website that I encourage you to have a look at in the break or after the webinar today, and it's an Australian case study as well, so it's always good to see where this actually is being applied in country. So migrating to Azure can be about saving now and being future ready. And you save money through some of the programs that are on offer to you. So that Azure Hybrid Benefit is one of those that allows you to take advantage of the license you've got already committed to and use that when going to cloud. For those that are on 2008 and R2, when you take those workloads to Azure, you can take those in their current version and modernise those and get advantage of free extended security updates as well. And it's through hybrid benefits, free security updates, and things like reserved instances that is very much up to 5 times less compared to some of the cloud competitors out there as well. So there's a lot of, as well as that, there's also programs available to you from Microsoft that can help with that. So there's a program called AMP, Azure Migration Program, that we'll talk about a bit later as well. And a lot of the tools are available for you to use, and usually free or very low cost to help you on that journey also. When you do modernise it, you get the ability, of course, then to scale as well. A lot of resiliency is built in, security management is built in there as well, and it can help with the scale and keeping your data assets managed and protected. It's hybrid by design, so you also have to run in hybrid mode to help with that migration transition as well. So when I say why trust us, it's not us, it's why trust Microsoft for your data estate modernisation. Certainly, there's a saying coming up, but basically, Microsoft SQL is not going to run any way better than in a Microsoft cloud environment. And SQL is one of the leading enterprise database platforms in the world through over 25 years of innovation to help achieve that. And so all that innovation goes into all the Azure SQL products that you can leverage and perform as part of your modernisation, that seamless migration experience as well. And as part of the lab, we'll see how we do an online migration to minimise any downtime for cutover as well. I've talked about some of those cost savings. There's a very competitive total cost of ownership around that through those hybrid use benefits and reserved instances pricing, and a lot of support through those programs I've mentioned as well. Now, I just want to just step away from the, I guess, the modernisation sort of detail that we work with to help you convey the messaging, just to talk you through some of the research we've done as well, to understand a bit more where clients we've seen our experience looking to move towards. And when we think about what clients we're trying to achieve, one of those things is around being data driven. A lot of clients talk around, I want to become more data driven to be able to make decisions in our environments. And we think about all those, the pressures we have, economic pressures and change in the world and our workforce, how we're trying to innovate and transform, then using data is really important. And when you use data to be more data driven, this is a report from McKinsey and Company, the report is that they are 23 more times likely to acquire customers, 6 times likely to retain customers, and 9 times likely to be more profitable. So there's, I guess, a level of evidence there that shows that by using data to help with that business decision making, when you empower your users and be able to let them use data to do their work, then there are benefits there for you. A couple of research points. The next one is from Nucleus Research, and this is around the economics from investing in analytics and BI projects. And every dollar spent, there was a $13 return on that as well. So again, the modernisation is a precursor to that. As you think about that longer term strategy around where do we want to be, what we want to be able to do with our data and achieve, then getting benefits out of that through return on analytics certainly there are very positive benefits in that. There was a research done by the Business Application Research Centre, or BARC, and they found that about half of all business decisions, we think that being data driven, 50% of those were based on gut feelings and intuition. Interestingly, we ran our own survey in 2019 and found a very similar number to show that response was that their decisions were ad hoc and instinct driven. So imagine what outcomes you could have if you had more evidence-based, data-based decision making available to you, and would you get better outcomes from that? Now you're using that data to help you drive where you want to be, and that data modernisation is a good step to help you towards that. When we think about what success with data looks like, this is some anecdotes from the survey we provided. We took some outcomes, and we think about what outcomes we achieve. It's around success looks like identifying trends to help serve our community best and being sustainable through better decisions, drive business operational decisions better, and having trust in information. And we do a lot of sort of hands-on work with clients around what some of the key problems are, and trust in data and is paramount. So if we go back to the I guess then the modernisation conversation, think about, we know it's important, and we know that if we want to set ourselves up going forward and get the success out of that, then we want to start thinking about being more data driven and modernising our data environment. Well, how do we do that? What we've got available to us, and when we start with the strategies. Now, depending on which industry analyst report, there is multiple numbers of R's, but for today we'll use 4 R's to help think about moving to the cloud. And the first is around rehost, which is around a lift and shift migration, where we don't do any changes to the underlying application or database, and we're able to then take what you're running, say, on premises now, and move that to the cloud and operate as if you're running in your on-premises data center. And that itself is a modernisation pattern, and that's a great first step. And as we'll go through the deep technology bits available for that, you'll see there's some advantages in being able to do that already for your admin teams to improve the productivity and support around those SQL databases. The next, and probably there's a lot of movement in the spaces around the refactoring approach, which is we're just going to change some elements of our application tier, and the database tier lends itself very easily to do that because there's a lot of like-for-like parity available to do that in the Azure SQL family. So we can refactor our data layer, move towards, say, a platform as a service model, get the advantages of to manage the operating system layer, and that's a really great migration strategy as well. When we think about re-architecting, this is where we start making some more wholesale changes to our tier, and when we go to rebuild, we also we're thinking about reimagining the application from scratch. And unless you're running, you've got your own bespoke applications that you have developed yourselves, then yeah, rehosting and refactoring is the options available to you. If you do have your own custom applications, then you may in time consider re-architecting and perpetual rebuilding as well. And we'll speak to clients who are looking to think about some of those other database structures that you can take advantage of as well, as NoSQL. So there's a few options there available to you, and each of those can be done as a modernisation within layered as you go forward. So you could start with a rehost and then refactor later and get more advantages as you go forward. So really what's available in the Azure SQL family is we have this portfolio of SQL Server on Azure VM, and then which is basically SQL Server deployed as you know it now, but in a cloud-hosted VM, which forms part of that rehost pattern we had in the previous screen. And it's great for that lift and shift, and if you need that operating system or access to move forward. If you're able to, and we'll talk about the assessments and migration processes a bit later, if you're able to then consider then a PaaS service, you can refactor also. And while Azure SQL Database is one of those, a lot of clients find that the Azure SQL Managed Instance is a really good landing spot for your databases. Just through those existing apps that you have, because it does provide almost parity, if not parity, for many of the features you may be using right now. And this is the line I was thinking of before: Azure is a cloud that knows SQL Server best. So you can imagine that when you want to move your workloads, this is platforms most optimized for those data workloads. So when you migrate and modernize to SQL in Azure, you get a lot of advantages that come with that. So they're always up to date. I talked about being evergreen platform before. It's the only cloud with evergreen SQL, so you'll never need to do a manual sort of patching again. It's all continuously updated for you behind the scenes by the Microsoft engineering team. You can be more productive. There's some AI features that enable for you to automate a lot of tasks, optimization of those data workloads. All the experience that your teams have in managing databases right now on premises don't go away. It is very much transfers across, and there's a consistent code base when you move from your on-premises data center to the cloud as well. We talked about the lowest total cost ownership in there, and we'll go into some more details on that shortly. But also protect your data in that real-time intelligent security, which is quite good. And we'll again look at some of the security options available in the hands-on labs. So when we think about modernising to as a lift and shift motion, it's very easy to think, okay, well, it's just running SQL in the cloud, so what do I, other than maybe I don't have to worry about my data center deployments, I can just run in the cloud, and maybe it's close to application. There's a set of services known as the SQL Server IaaS extension, which is basically a plugin on the VM that gives you some PaaS-like capabilities for running your SQL environment in the cloud. And so there's all the automation such as auto backup, auto patching, always on availability, automation around that, which is time consuming, will happen for you in the resource provider there. You can get a dashboard for your VM awareness. So it's basically a blade inside of the Azure portal, and you can look at all your SQL deployments in one place and manage those there. So use that sort of single pane of glass experience. And when you need to think about, well, licensing and software assurance and whatever else you're doing, then that resource provider helps you then manage when it comes to that time to make sure you're compliant with your database environment as well. So it's a lot of advantages there to help with getting you running and getting ready for modernising, and give you a taste of what a real PaaS experience is, optimising some of the IaaS pieces for you as well. So this So there's a few options there, and you may be thinking around, well, which way should I go? Should I go towards a VM or a managed instance or a SQL database? Not really sure. And so this sort of diagram here is to give you a bit of guidance around what that might be. If you need, and to summarise that, if you need operating system level access, or you're running a Microsoft Distributed Transaction Coordinator, we may have some capabilities at the VM level, or we may have some reporting services you're reliant on, or analysis services that you can't modernise to other Azure services right now. Then the SQL server on Azure VM is going to be your best bet to start. And as you then either reduce the dependency on those pieces are running on the VM, whether it's other code you're running, or maybe it is around SQL analysis services or reporting services. Then once you've sort of taken those constraints away, you could then modernise to a SQL managed instance. So if you only need access to a SQL database instance, and you still need a SQL agent though, and you might need some SSIS, then the SQL managed instance is a good fit for you. And so there's a lot of customers are finding is a good fit. If you are rethinking your application altogether and you're open to innovation and potentially re-architect a piece, rebuild, then Azure SQL Database could be a good option for you as well. If it's up to 100 terabyte storage and you want to be able to pause and restart the workload, it's really good. But you'll see there's that dotted line of a node back to the SQL managed instance, because that's really a really good fit to be the best of. I need SQL. I want my cloud, in this case Azure, to manage the environment for me, keep it up to date, and I just do what I do best, which is my database administration around and getting the right value there and unlocking the time we normally take to then administer that environment. Now, for those for those who are familiar with SQL Server, it's not just a database engine. There's a lot of other components that make up SQL Server as well, including integration services, which is SSIS, reporting services, which is SSRS, and analysis service, which is the SSAS. Now, options for you as well to move those elements into PaaS services also. So for those SSIS packages, which is where we do all data integration or ETL work, moving that into Azure Data Factory is the way to go to that. Azure Data Factory provides either a no-code approach, or you can take your redeveloped SSIS packages and deploy those into Azure as well. If you haven't considered Power BI before for your reporting needs, that is the best way to go towards that. And depending on which type of reporting you need, whether you need paginated reports or non-paginated, there's different licensing constructs that you need to take into consideration. I won't explore those today. They'll be a subject of a separate webinar, I'm sure. But there are some nuances around what we think about when we use Power BI, and some clients, still hang on to needing to run reporting services, but a lot of them are considering how do we transition off of that as well. And Joe's recently done a POC with a customer running paginated reports where we're looking at using Power BI Premium to give them a very similar experience to what they're doing now, and that's and they're now making their business case decisions around and making those changes. But it is the way to go. And there are options also for running, say, reporting services. Power BI report server when you've got the right licensing entitlements in, say, a VM in Azure Cloud as well, if you still have that dependency for it. It's going to be part of that modernization strategy. And finally, analysis services has its own service in Azure as well. But there are some sort of nuances around if you're running premium and you may be using Azure Synapse as a data warehouse, then it may negate the need for analysis services. So what we do with clients is work with you to understand what you're trying to achieve and then find the right fit. And sometimes you can negate the need for analysis services as well, which is always good to have one less item to manage. All that the componentry is built into Premium, Power BI Premium, and the Synapse database, data warehouse. So we talked a bit about lowering that total cost of ownership, and there's a few key offers available to you. So I mentioned that hybrid benefit as well. We can use those on-premises licenses you have at discounted rates to take into Azure SQL. And you can save up to 9% compared to AWS. You also take advantage of reserve capacity as well. So reserve capacity allows you to basically pre-commit to using a database, and for all of you, I'm sure all your database servers have been around for a period of time, probably at least if not 3 or more years, because applications are there usually long term. And when you pre-commit, you can save more, and combined with hybrid benefit, you can get up to like 80% savings, which is how we're able to achieve that. More acceptable to achieve that cost benefit ratio. Also, dev test pricing available to you through those Visual Studio subscriptions, so you can run your dev and test environments in the cloud as well. And I mentioned those free security updates for those running SQL 2008 and 2008 R2, with 3 years when you're running to Azure virtual machines also. So analysis are done here compared to with and without hybrid benefits. This is a scenario. This might be US dollar based. So just this is where working with our licensing team can help you navigate this in more detail. Those depending on what type of license you're using for your SQL version at the moment. So it's core license only, then you can have access to the hybrid benefits as well. And as I said, it does reduce the running of the Azure SQL workload as well. You have to have SA, let's mention that, sorry. The other benefit you have with using Azure Hybrid Benefits is you can, migrating a database or a whole application stack can take time. So you get the ability to use that license for 180 days to allow that time for migration across on-premises and Azure at the same time. So that's really valuable to make sure you're compliant with any licensing requirements there also. Now this is some a research company, GigaOn, which we'll paste in the chat window as well. It was released, I think it was end of November 2019, analysing the running a Azure SQL database in AWS compared to Azure. And the results was it was up to 86% less in cost to do that because of things like hybrid benefits, reserve business pricing, but also ran 3.6 times faster as well. So that report is available to have a look at, read, and get across. It provides some good information for the hardware geeks, those who like to understand a bit more around performance elements as well, that you can sink your teeth into and see how the two clouds stacked up. There's another report also commissioned, and this was with Forrester. It's the total economic impact for migration of Microsoft Azure SQL into a managed database. And so Forrester did that analysis, and the key findings on the right on the screen here show that there was overall a 238% total ROI over 3 years. They got payback within 3 months. Now that payback came in a couple of different facets. So one is the time for IT teams just to be productive around just managing in the data center. Also the productivity for those DBAs as well, because all of that work now is managed by the cloud provider, Azure. And there's follow-on savings also with having to run the hardware, network, storage, and maintenance costs to go along with that, which is where compounded within the optimized the benefits you get or can running SQL in Azure achieves that ROI. And that's again another report to have a read. And if you're looking for information to work with a business case around running in your cloud workloads in Azure, please use that. And I stress that because, as I said earlier in the session, we do see some clients just use the Azure calculator that's publicly available, but they might be missing out on understanding what's actually the price relevant for us and our agreement based on our circumstances. So use the Azure calculator as a rough guide, but we often find, and when we've run assessments with clients where we do an inventory analysis, there's a lot of optimizations, not only with reserve instance pricing hybrid benefits, but also consolidation opportunities, and that's part of an assessment service that we partner with Microsoft on providing as well. The also, really good reason for modernisation, and which is paramount to everyone, is layer security, and why Azure is there's security built into the broad platform, and it is multi-layered. Starting at in the core data protection layer, when you create a new database instance, everything is turned on to be with transparent data encryption by default. So everything is always encrypted at rest and in transit as well. And you can take advantage of dynamic data masking, relative security. We'll look at some of the transparent data encryption in the hands-on labs. There's also a separate exercise around dynamic data masking if anyone's interested in doing that as well. Access management around, very granular, using the roles management for ITU or RBAC controls inside of Azure, the firewalling, the VNetting, and so on, all comes together. You can use, of course, MFA or multi-factor authentication to really restrict and control access to the database also. And on top of that, you've got the advanced threat protection from Microsoft and Azure, over your environment all the time, and you do vulnerability assessments. There's also data discovery and classification options there as well for you. And Microsoft is, one of the highest level of compliance certificates you can find. If you haven't looked at the Azure Trust Center, basically everything from APRA to DSD as well is covered in there. A lot of international things like GDPR and PCI DSS as well is all compliant with those industry regulations, requirements. Okay, so we've talked a lot about modernising your Microsoft SQL workloads. What about open source databases? If we go back to let's have a look at those. Thank you for for those 14 now who have responded to that. I asked, are we using any other database technologies? And in open source, we have a few people using MySQL and PostgreSQL. So this section is very relevant for yourselves to understand that. Yet we can also modernise your open source databases into Azure. So Microsoft is a company that's committed to open source and supporting open source, and I've certainly seen that, and even talking to the product managers in Microsoft who work in this space, they are contributing back to the repositories for those products as well, to make sure that any optimizations they can make is available to the community. We know open source is a strategy, is part of a strategy for at least 40%, more than 40% of CIOs, and 90% of enterprises deploy open source in some shape or form. And so there's a lot of reasons why organizations do that. The Azure provides open source database services across MySQL, PostgreSQL, and MariaDB. It can help with lowering the total cost of ownership by managing those for you in a PaaS-like instance. Also, with all that intelligence around performance security built into it. Also, a few years ago, there was a product in the market called Citus Hyperscale, which was the PostgreSQL scaling engine, or to allow scaling of PostgreSQL databases. Microsoft bought into that and deployed that technology within Azure and made that available as well. So you can deploy PostgreSQL multi-node database very, very, very quickly. And it comes with all the integrations you expect with other Azure services. So you can build new and invent new applications, or use entirely existing applications to be able to build that going forward and using open source databases. Much like the model we have with Microsoft Database, we have on-premises deployments, IaaS and PaaS options available to you. With IaaS and PaaS options, of course, you're running on-premises now. and all the advantages I just spoke to in the previous slide. There's also, in terms of a total cost of ownership, on this slide here, there's advantage to get cost savings compared to AWS. They have a higher SLA, Azure has a higher SLA guarantee, that need to create replicas, and it's optimized and right sized for your instance workloads. And you see some figures there around the cost savings from Azure compared to AWS. And finally, wrap up this this little bit here. This is another case study, and we're going to post a link to this in the chat window. So GeekWire is a media technology company based in Seattle, Washington, and they had a big growth in their readership and subscriptions, and they needed to scale their WordPress site. And they transitioned to using a MySQL MySQL database in Azure. And they'll scale that demand while keep cutting their costs from running this on premise as well. So again, a nice customer story that helps demonstrate that yes, we can start considering Azure with our applications, migrating those. Then the open source comes in scope as well to help manage that. So I've now been chatting for a bit. I might take a break now and just, Marcel, have we got any questions come through from the audience?
Yes, we got one question. It's a question about Azure Data Factory and about the availability of that in Australia. Is that generally available at the moment?
Absolutely. Joe's nodding. Yeah, Azure Data Factory has been around for a while. And there's a if you, I won't do it right now, but if you bing Azure services by region, there's a great website they provide that shows you which services are available in country. I was looking at this a couple of weeks ago for a federal government client. I think it's even in the Canberra data centre as well. So if it's in Azure Central, it's definitely in Azure Australia. So yes, Azure ADF is one of those core services that is available in Australia that you can use straight away. Pretty much everything I've spoken to, I haven't confirmed all the open source stuff. Certainly Azure pieces have been in Australian country for a few years now. So when you do deploy, it's all, well, this is APRA, Australian Prudential. It's the banking standard basically. That is, when you read that, when you go through the detail of what's involved in that, and I've helped clients navigate what's needed to be included, then Azure ticks all the boxes for being compliant. In fact, APRA have released a statement saying that they're compliant. Azure is a compliant cloud platform for doing that. If you think about the fintech sector, it's supporting Azure as a cloud provider, or cloud providers, as a way to go. Then you get a lot of the supporting elements like SSIS, analysis services, Power BI, all in country.
Okay.
Yeah.
So another question is, if a customer has an application that doesn't support cloud databases, what can they do?
Yeah, I hear this one a lot from customers, because they go, well, I've got this application, and but they say the vendor service can't move to cloud, and we have to keep on this version of SQL, and that's it. And they lock them into doing that because they don't necessarily be generous with updating their software regularly, or maybe it's very hard to do. So there's actually a capability. There's actually a matrix available from Microsoft that shows that when you run your database engine, you can run it in a compatibility version that it's locked into. So if you say it's a SQL 2014 database that is supported by your vendor and nothing later, then you can run your databases in that compatibility level in Azure in a VM, or Azure managed instance as well. I think in Azure database you can do the compatibility levels, Joe. Yeah, it's not there. So you can run those as if you're running in on data center. Probably this, obviously there's a lot of testing you have to go, and you want to make sure you support it. Worst case, you can still modernize that SQL database as the SQL Server 2014 edition is Azure VM. All right, so you can still deploy, modernize as the first step. So you're running in Azure, get some of those benefits we talked about for running in there, but deploy this, have complete control upon what version of SQL you deploy there as well. So there's a few ways you could tackle that. I have spoken to one of the engineering managers at Microsoft about this topic about 2 years ago now, and they will say and support that, well, we can lock in because we're looking at capability level. You should be able to run any application at that compatibility level in any version of Azure SQL. But of course, making sure the application support is important, and rigorous testing and getting that buy-in. But that default fallback position of can modernise to a VM is probably the best way to go for that customer.
Okay.
Yep.
There's also a specific one about Cosmos DB. Can we modernize to that?
Absolutely, if your application sort of it lends itself to doing that. So Cosmos DB is one of those NoSQL database engines. So if you're running a NoSQL application now, then it might be easier to do. It's very easier said than done. But it's one of those patterns, part of that, potentially that rebuild, re-architect that you may want to consider. Well, would a non-relational database be more efficient to do that? So while as you say, yes, I think a little bit more design engineering could go into thinking about, well, yeah, there's would Cosmos be right for us? And I did talk to a customer last year about they're on the verge of their own custom app. How do we move that to, could we use Cosmos, and conversation around that? And they were going down a potential rebuild path as well. So that's if you need that geoscalability with low latency, then that's it could be some use cases that move towards that, and maybe it is let's re-architect that part of our, or even the subcomponents of our application if we need those sort of criteria to meet it.
Yeah. There's another question from Dean with regards to what are the constraints around refactoring apps? For example, COTS, products limited in terms of availability to refactor or re-architect.
Yes, so some of our COTS application really fits well into, if we go back to those modernisation patterns, put that back on the screen that we have here. And geez, it should be one of these ones. It's just after, there it is. So if we go back to this one here, Dean, and look at what those modernisation or migration strategies are, those COTS applications are difficult because they are fairly constrained. You don't have a lot of leverage to make changes to, or any changes to it. So lift and shift is one of those migration strategies and modernisation strategies you can use to take advantage of modernising that. So your application tier and your database tier could be imagine so it's a simple two server application could lift and shift into the cloud right now and give you a whole range of benefits from scalability immediately, and redundancy and so on right now, and you've done the modernisation step. Some of those COTS applications potentially, when you think about the refactoring element here on the screen, is where you might potentially leverage something like an Azure SQL managed instance as well. So you potentially, if you're not running anything that relies on, if we go into one of the slides I had here, we think of what those options are and why, what we do. If there's no constraints here under the migration, you can potentially, it's basically a database, there's nothing else fancy. You'd be obviously you'd have to check the support with that, and if application vendors are starting to think about these modernisation patterns, but in principle you should be able to modernise that to an Azure SQL managed instance, because it is feature parity with a SQL server running on premises or a SQL server running in Azure VM. It's just they've basically taken away your ability to manage your operating system because you don't need to. It is basically full access to manage a database instance. So if it's only database instance level access that the application needs, there should be no reason to not be able to use it as a modernisation pattern as well. But obviously replications and application support is important as well, we need to consider. So yeah, cool.
No further questions open at the moment.
Cool, great. Thank you, Marcel. Thank you for those who asked a few questions. So what we'll do now is we will just dive a little deeper into, I guess, how we get started with migration, taking our workloads into Azure. Excuse me. All right, so there's what Microsoft have done in terms of the broader, how do we help customers get into Azure, have developed a framework called the Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure. This is what we have here on the screen. Sometimes referred to as the CAF when talking to various folk, and it is the high level thought and guidance around how customers, based on lots of customer migrations, lots of input from partners around how to do this. We've even adopted this and got our own version of the CAF at Data3 to give us be more prescriptive in some areas that we think it makes more sense for our clients. And this is actually such a big thing that actually, like Microsoft products which go into preview and have a general availability, they had a general availability of the CAF in November 2019 at Ignite. So it's actually there's a team of people behind this who have got, I think it was over 1 million words in the guidance to help you do that. And again, we've then found gaps and we've adopted this to help make sense. But it relies on, to walk through this to help see what it brings together, is that defining the strategy and getting executive sponsorship, everyone's aligned. Sometimes if it's around defining what cloud strategy we're having, what's our vision roadmap, and making sure that the leaders are in. And once that's what's started, we think about these migration waves to to plan what we're going to do. Just get a realistic sense of all the apps, infrastructure, our data estate, do the right discovery and assessments, what workloads are going to move, which ones we're not going to move, and potentially build business cases as well that go into a migration plan. And so customers don't just go big bang into Azure. It is around taking deliberate small steps over time to manage that transition and move into cloud. So that planning is really important. In terms of readiness, for some clients, they've got Azure already and may have dipped their toe in the water and tried a few things, maybe some dev test workloads, maybe some clients run a website, for example, in Azure as well, but haven't really taken any of their underlying business systems across. How do they do that? So we went through readiness. We think about what we call the landing zones, which is where we're going to move workloads into. We have there's some programs we talked about earlier available to clients around how we set up an Azure foundation effectively to make sure that Azure is set up with the right security, the right networking, all naming conventions, all the cost associations, tagging, everything like that. Sort of we do a lot of that to help clients, those who either haven't started or have started their own way, but it's kind of got a bit messy because they haven't really thought about it, and that's fine because I'm an IT techo at heart, I guess, and certainly trying things out is a good way we learn. So the readiness step is really just make sure, okay, we've got the standard in place, everything makes sense, we know how to manage it, and now we know somewhere we deploy those workloads. Then the adopt phase is really execution and migration, and making sure we right size and moving workloads across to that, and then doing a cutover. And around that, of course, there was the governance and management that you need to make sure we keep the regular cadence going for those migration waves. Things are the same, you can adapt and adapt as well, to make sure that those overarching components like backup and monitoring security are all in place as well as managing the subscription costs also. So that CAF guidance is really, really good, and I think is there a link that we've got that one, Marcel, we can share with the audience?
Yes, the CAF link has been shared in the announcements. Lovely,
thank you, Marcel. Now, if we dive a bit deeper into migration planning, that's the high level. What do we sort of do to look at data estate and how we modernise that? And it's really for any workload, but think about databases in particular. If we go on the path of let's assess what we've got, we do a migration, we optimize, and then we secure and manage, and then it all happens in unison. And you can see there some of the services there. We use Azure Migrate to do assessment, the database migration service to migrate, and we'll use that as part of the hands-on labs today. And while it's our scope of today's discussion, then you've got things like Azure Cost Management, and then there's security management features as well in there. And altogether, we work on the target workloads, the timelines, the approach, and how that will happen. How we test and everything else to get those workloads across like that. And partners like R3 and through Microsoft Engineering, such as Fast Track, can help you with that migration planning also. Now, Azure Migrate is the hub for data center migration. It brings together all the assessment information, and we use it for doing the discovery, assessment, and then migrations on-premises applications across as well. It provides a comprehensive approach to migrating applications and data center estate into cloud, and supports those key workloads, not only SQL databases or databases in general, but Linux, Windows servers, some of the web apps, some workstations if you're using virtual desktop infrastructure as well, and supports VMware Hyper-V also. So it's a comprehensive hub, as I said, to help you migrate also. In terms of the data journey to Azure, how does Microsoft help you provide seamless end-to-end path with near zero downtime, very resilient migration at scale? Well, we from a variety of those data sources on the left here to then move into the destination in Azure, whether it's a MySQL, PostgreSQL, SQL database, Cosmos, however. So the two key tools is there's a pieces as an assessment, and then depending on the scenario, I've got a cheat sheet coming up that we'll step through as well to make sense of these acronyms. But Azure Migrate, SSMA, DMA, and DEA are all available to you depending on what you're trying to migrate across. And that assessment helps understand, is it ready to migrate? Are there blockers? Here's what do you need to remediate, can help with that. Then the database migration service is the way to help migrate those databases across to Azure. It's probably time also to bring up one of those programs I mentioned before. It's called AMP, the Azure Migration Program, and it's a program designed to align to the Cloud Adoption Framework to help simplify that journey to cloud. There's some offers and incentives available, tools, the Fast Track engineering, and help from partners like Data3 to help with that. But probably one of the key things is to help with your teams is that technical skill building, help understand how to then not only migrate, but then manage the cloud environments going forward. So that's a program that you can take advantage of. If you're liking information, the contact links into this webinar to contact if you like Data3 to help you with that. I just want to step back to some of the data points we've encountered as well. Just thinking about that data in the future. I had on earlier on the screen. Just want to share with you some of the challenges we have seen with clients not being able to get towards that data-driven future. And it is very relevant to the modernisation of our data estates as well. And the top three here are things like skills in the team. It's very relevant. We know a lot of our team members are used to working in traditional data centers, and so it is a change. We have to think about how do we modernise and manage in cloud. Understanding what potential costs and the ROI will be is difficult, which is where some of the assessment pieces we've talked about can come handy. And while we might be able to solve as a data modernisation, the data capture and quality component, potentially we could help with that, because now you might be able to have a way to scale your ability to collect data, which might help your any data capture. And there are some data quality services available to you as well in Azure, but we won't dive into today. The only I'll call out in here is security and compliance. That's not as a higher barrier for helping clients in their data journey, but that is a concern. And so when you think about going to a cloud platform as Azure, such as Azure, can help you achieve compliance through those compliance offerings, then that's it helps mitigate some of the risks you might have around managing your security compliance on premises right now by modernising to the cloud. Okay, so we'll look at the data migration tools in more detail, and we're zooming a bit further around these processes here. So, in terms of the this is kind of the assessment phase, they call it pre-migration on this slide. But think about before we do a migration, we do the understand where our data assets are. We want to do that inventory collection, do the assessment, and if we need to, convert schemas and so on. And once that's done, we can do the migration with the objects. We can do it as sync and then cut over as well. And we'll again that part really is part of what we'll do in the hands-on labs today. And then once you've done a obviously you do a test migration first, but you've tested and it's all fine. Then once you migrate, you would any remediation you need to take care of, you take those actions, run all your functional performance tests, and you continue to optimize. And that may be a simple process, particularly the optimization and testing, as you then move databases over and then adopt cloud services with it. We saw in the questions, and it's very clear that databases are intrinsically tied to applications. And while I'm not going to dwell on applications in this webinar, suffice to say that we need to think about migrating our applications at the same time. So there's a tool called the App Service Migration Assistant, which is really for that app load, particularly if you're using web services. It can be helpful when used in unison with the database migration service to bring your application across at once. So if you are running a bespoke, web service or a portal of some kind, then you can potentially modernize that, and potentially even some COTS applications. We can have something like WordPress, even though it's open source. It gets used, and it could run as an app service layer as well when it's run on a virtual machine. But there are other tools to help you with the application layer, particularly ASP.NET stuff also. But we won't be exploring that. In the hands-on labs, there is some exploring of that in the exercises available to you, but we won't be focusing on those today, but you're welcome to look at those at your leisure, the allocation lab we've got. So with all these terms about, I've read through, what tool do we use? So this is the cheat sheet that I've created to think about what tools we use at the right time. So, I've got about all of I just realised, but the database migration service we use for migration, it's the migration scenario. If you're a SQL Server Oracle, and I saw there's at least one Oracle user attending today, then in destination you can use into Azure, including Oracle and Azure VM. Then the DMS, Database Migration Services, is a tool you can use to help with that migration. The Data Migration Assistant is if you do assessment and an upgrade, typically from those earlier versions like 2005, then that's the tool to consider. I did see there was one in the survey questions, but I don't think we do run into too many 2005s anymore, do we, Joe? I feel 2008 still around, but not too many 2005s, thankfully. When you've got the non-SQL data sources, then something like the SQL Server Migration Assistant, or SSMA, is the tool for choice to take things like Oracle or SES and move MySQL, SAP, DB2, and Access to those destinations. In Oracle, it might be in Synapse. One we I don't think I've ever seen used in reality is the Database Experimentation Assistant. It's really for if you've got a legacy application running an old version of SQL and you need to do A/B testing for a modern version of SQL, whether you're running on premises or in the cloud. That's the tool that Microsoft has available to use. I don't think I've ever seen it used with a customer before. You really use that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally, we've got Azure Migrate, which if you're doing that lift and shift scenario, IaaS migrations, this is basically everything from Windows Linux VMs going to a VM is the tool to use there. So hopefully that helps understand the different sort of tools available in the kit bag there as well. And finally, before I throw to questions, I just want to, I guess this is as an extension of the our data journey map, we've created a framework and used with a few clients now around the modernisation for that. And it's just helpful to walk through some of the key elements here to help you think about what steps you need to take through. And it really is focused on the initial planning part of the CAF to get yourself ready for the migration motion. And so as part of this, looking at the first sort of large box here, the data capability assessment, what we're really thinking about do is understand what the stakeholder outcomes will be, understand what your current capability is, and it's around not only the technology but your people and your process as well. And we will do a line with our data journey map to help sort of look at, well, what options might be. And we have a maturity report we can provide to show you where you are on your journey. The meaty bit in the middle here is where we do some inventory collection and do the assessment. So we're running use those tools that were mentioned before, to understand what you've got in your environment. And when we're tied with a Microsoft program for this, there are tools available to us as a partner that we can use to then do cost modelling and estimations for you as well. Now, you've used it for Joe and a couple of customers. This is it also just gives you cost estimates. It also shows you consolidation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and some of the reports I think I've seen out from that, there's significant savings over 2 or 3 years when you're not just considering lift and shift, but modernising, and we're going to manage instances. So then let's take these 5 servers and bring them into one instance and manage them together. So you can imagine the savings of licensing can be immense. And we do things like hands-on labs to help with skills development here also. And then finally, in that planning phase, is we take away understanding around here's what you can achieve, build a bit of conceptual design, look at some of those patterns that are relevant for you, review some applications that are representative, understand, well, here's how an approach it would work. We put a high-level transition plan together as well. So that's we've done a few of those now, and that can help with some of the planning piece to help before you get towards migration. So you can use that to think about what might be important for you as well. So this stage, any questions, Marcel, have come up from the audience?
Yes, we've got a question from Craig. His question is, how reliable are these migration tools? Expressed in a percentage.
So I'll start with the opening statement, which is that the Azure Database Migration Service is designed for scale migrations and is quite reliable. But I'm going to throw it to Joe because you've had hands-on experience with clients around doing that. So what's your experience with reliability of those tools?
I think that they are very reliable from my experience, and I haven't had any failure of using some of the tools. So if there are any possible compatibility issues, these tools help you to detect these incompatibilities and parity. So once you know that the issues exist, so you probably will reconsider the migrations.
But the key thing is, once you've got that, set the feedback on what those fixes need to be. The key is remediating those, and that will set you up for a successful migration.
And do the testings.
Do your testing. So very reliable when you take the advice of the assessment tools, and make sure you test so you've got confidence as well. But experience collectively and my anecdotal evidence as well from customers I talk to is it's reliable. Thanks, Craig.
Okay, good. Another question is about if you have to keep your database running 24/7, are there ways, strategies to minimize downtime?
Absolutely, good question. So we can, and we'll see this in the hands-on lab today. We're actually going to do an online migration. So, and what kind of the process we're going to go through today to sort of reveal what we're going to do is take a running database. We're going to do a transfer of data across while it's still operational. We're going to make some changes in the source system, and then we're going to do an update and then a cut over to that. So we can be very short time to do a transition to cloud as well to minimise our downtime. So you don't need to turn everything off, wait several hours to go across the internet to get to Azure. you can transfer data pretty quickly. If you've got really large data sets, like massive amounts, there are data box services, which is basically from Microsoft. Basically, you plug it in your data center, pre-stage your data down onto that, and Microsoft engineer will take that into the data center or connect it in and do a transfer and basically pre-seed that for you. And then it's around then doing the deltas after that. So there's a few techniques around minimizing that. For those that have to have the highly available workloads, such as websites and so on, to minimize that. Of course, all your right testing will allow you to, or even things like techniques such as doing network gateways, so you're not filtering all your users over to the new environment. From the moment you can start seeding those over, testing, and then transition those across as transactions finish on your on-premises to the new. There's a whole range of ways we can sort of think about that, depending on the scenario as well. Any other questions?
No, those are the questions.
Cool, fantastic.
Thank you.
Alrighty, now.
And the reply is appreciated by the audience.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share another. I'm going through. Actually, I'm not going to. So Caitlin is helping us in the back end with the production of this. So I've got a scenario to play through first, and then I'll whiteboard it digitally to you. But I've got a scenario that we're going to use to, I guess, go through a bit of a session. We'll think about what does it mean for the client, and what options have available to them to plan out their migration. This is something that we would do with a customer fairly typically. So the scenario in this case is a fictitious customer, of course. There's a company called the Great Pacific Company, and it's a freight transport logistics business for bulk goods, and they've got about 15 SQL servers, and it ranges from SQL 2008 R2 to 2016. And they think there might even be some MySQL there for a WHS application. Their workloads are critical to their business, and they require to have support systems running all the time. Customers were recently impacted by a data center outage and regularly complain it takes too long by email and the call center follow-up and routine queries. There's some frustrations there from their clients. They do have an Azure presence already for some workloads, but the bulk of it is still running in their data center. Some application vendors do not support the latest version of SQL Server. So this is one of the early questions we had from one of the attendees. Nor they run against an Azure SQL database. So how do we cater for that? For one of their applications, the application vendor's gone out of business. This happens more often than we'd like as well. Legacy applications that we all rely on. And some of their primary aims is bringing their database and support, decommissioning their data center within that 12 months, and be able to start becoming data-driven in decision making. And we'll talk a bit about that already today. So things like operational performance, maintenance of their rolling stock is all important. And their only one DBA has been supporting this platform for the last 8 years. Has a lot of time to get skilled up because they're busy supporting this environment. In layer SQL, along with layer technology as well. So I'm just going to share. I've got another a device with a pen on it. I'm just going to, Caitlin, I'm just going to share. Once that's done, can you please make that available to the audience? I need to actually share my screen, which would help. Cool. Is that live, Marcel?
Yes, it's live.
Lovely.
Your whiteboard is visible.
The system works. I have a big glare. Hopefully not to our camera, but glare in the light. So that's a walkthrough. This is we've got sort of 8 sort of pieces here. I'm going to walk through to think about what we're going to think about in that scenario there. And so we come back to the data journey map. We have our the organizational opportunity, which is around your customers, your employees, your operations, your products and services. And we think about, first of all, what do we need to do around that? So we think about customers. We saw in that scenario there was a problem with their customer experience, right, and around the services that they have available to them. So how can we improve the customer experience, and the service is important. There's a lot of routine queries that came up, so perhaps there's maybe some opportunities around virtual agents that could help with the ability to respond to queries automatically and provide a more positive experience back to their customers for things that are quick and easy to do. And maybe if they've got larger customers, maybe there's some self-service reporting they can make available to them, so they can go on, log in, and track where things are at, or status of, say, invoicing or what have you, or processing orders to complement maybe their existing portal systems they are using already. Now, the employee hear much about the employees in terms of what impact could be here. But they're having to respond to a lot of queries. So maybe there's some, if it's around database, it might be around having them access to analytics and insights that they didn't have before. And I've worked with customers who have they work in silos, their teams, and it's just incredibly the delay by time their team does something and they get feedback on that 2 weeks later through KPI reporting. So that speed is really important, and maybe it's important to help with some of those that affects the customer service in this case as well. But and so we'll play along with this as well. In terms of the operations, something about the operations two elements here. One's the IT operations. So now the DBA, we can improve that the DBA's, ability to support the environment, and perhaps it sounds like it's very reactionary. So how do we help him more effective, him or her effective in this case? So that could help with the IT operations. But we talked about some of the things I want to do in here, such as that kind of data driven. The preventative maintenance could certainly help. Think about preventative maintenance, help with. Sorry, I can only do one thing at a time, obviously. Preventative maintenance can assist with time of their equipment being out of service unexpectedly. So they know when they're going to schedule their rolling stock or their transit vehicles for maintenance, they can then manage the capacity of their workload at the same time, and again not have improved experience to the customers. So actually has a flow-on effect in that regard as well. In terms of products and services, or maybe through use of all data, that they can optimize in optimizing operations, that they actually are able to flow on, reduce, say, time for delivery. And so these might be, again, we're sort of imagining a little bit here as well, but this is not far off what we experience when we work with those customers in real scenarios. But this is one based on a few of them. But the impact we have with data is they can actually have a flow effect to what they do, and it could have a positive impact to customers. So it is slightly cyclical in nature. So we thought about some of the opportunities available to us, and we thought about what if we had the dream motion where we go, well, that's good because I use a term sometimes, if I had a magic wand, what would you imagine we could do and improve that? And you hear from different parts of the business. This is no longer just an IT conversation, as you can expect. And we hear things about what executive sponsors are looking to achieve as well, which is where you get real intelligence around what they'd like to be able to do as a business, that we can think about as technology professionals, that we can use services such as Azure. Having the right foundation is important. Then those flow-on services that we have. In terms of business outcomes, what would we expect outcomes to be? So we might, in terms of business growth, maybe is around increase the number of customers. Now, if we can have satisfied customers and they refer to us, our business growth is just to bring more customers in. That will, obviously more revenue and increase profit and overall growth. We might have a target to say, reduction of say 20% of unplanned outages might be an operational objective, and it's good to be being specific around here too. So we can start thinking about, well, to drive that, well, how do we think of measuring that, what it is now, and then how can we improve it, and know where say IT systems might be as part of that. And given there's an aging data center, our support, then resiliency could be a part of that, which was solved through a data modernisation play here as well. In terms of compliance, risk and safety, we did see that there was a WHS platform in every organisation. Safety is paramount. So we make sure that maybe from a safety and maybe probably likely compliance view as well, we make sure our WH system is supported. So any issues with that, there's not going to have any injury in the workplace. And then there might be other compliance standards or things like that that might be relevant. Unless you're sort of in a sort of regulated industry, sometimes these are not as straightforward to tease out. But there might be, say, if there was a GDPR or something like that, compliance they need to achieve, maybe working with European customers, that might be relevant as well. So something to consider. And lastly, they've talked about being data driven. That helps with business agility. And if you're able to be agile and use your data, they can help with that decision making. Hopefully, reduce that reliance. Decision making. Hopefully, reduce that reliance on those gut instincts we saw in some earlier research before. So what I want to do now is think about, in terms of the data journey map, where is this client at in terms of what they need to do. So it's very clear that there's a lot of work around data foundations that can be improved through getting this database and support, but we also see there's flow-on effects to other areas as well that might be useful over time. So it's a key to helping become data-driven, preventive maintenance, virtual agents, and so on. And so that flow-on effect is going to be pretty important. In terms of the capabilities that we need to grow, this client needs to grow. The very clear one is the data estate modernisation and migration to Azure is there as a focus, as well as it's helping with the database administration as another capability that will grow with skills development and be able to manage this and have time freed, because now all of that is managed by going into Azure. But like we saw in our journey map, it starts enabling a lot of other services back into those objectives of organisation opportunities and business outcomes. We can see that things like reporting, self-service BI, chatbots, that machine learning comes part of preventive maintenance. We start thinking about how modernising can help us do that. We also start seeing where we might have gaps. We might have to consider, there's this data warehouse here. We might have to think about that before we can we can go straight into a database and do reporting. There might be some benefits around warehousing the data as well. But as a primary step, the ones that are circled there are the ones that we would focus on with this client. Next thing I want to do is think about the Modernisation. And this is that, I guess, more of a towards a solution view of what would we start deploying here as well. So very clearly, there's need to be modernised, and they're modernising to cloud as well. There's not much else on here. Excuse me. On here, that's into the technology layers, because we're not exploring those use cases in this scenario. But again, we see how this is an enabler for doing preventive maintenance. I think about preventive maintenance for rolling stock, or maybe there's streaming data as well. So modernising cloud may mean we are able to now capture data we couldn't capture before. That allows us to integrate into, say, data warehouse, then building solutions with that preventive maintenance. So these all feed together to provide. We're aligned to our organizational opportunities, the business outcomes, and we're supporting the business users, including customers, as part of that. In terms of the database administrator, they're very much key to this as well. As we start then, next stage beyond the migration, there's then other either roles or capabilities that person may need to develop skills around. And of course, across the whole organisation, there are things like data security with every customer we need to consider. We also made things like data governance might be important as well. Start thinking about that now, as we start adopting these cloud technologies so that we can now scale and build these out. And then build in other capabilities around DR to help with that, outage and downtime. Maybe there's some training requirements for the particularly the DBA at the moment, but as we then build in other capabilities, other training required, and we could go on around that. But you start seeing how it starts building out a very tactical way of thinking about what we do here. Now, we start looking at the CAF. This is a slightly different image to what we have on the screen before, but it's the same concepts. We know they've got a strategy towards going to Azure. They've already got that landing in there. They've already started planning the go towards it. But there's a skill readiness plan when you consider, and the cloud adoption is probably needs more refinement. The first learning zone is set up already. They're using Azure, so it's around expanding the landing zones, is to allow for these new workloads and applications and data to go in here. And then it's really focusing on the migrate part of the adoption phase to help bring that together, as well as the governance and management around the top of that as well. So we move on then to again digging deeper into what we need to consider. Let's look at some of the tools we have available to us. This is the cheat sheet I had on the screen before. Now we know that for migration, the database migration service is going to be severely poor asterisks. Try again. Database migration service is going to be used for the migration pieces. In terms of assessment, what do we need to use? So we know we have certainly database migration assessment upgrade. So we might need to use a database migration assistant potentially to assess some of those data sources that might be considered. We know we've got a MySQL database in there, the WHS app. So we'll need to consider that for that data source. Probably don't need we won't need the database experimentation assistant, no requirements that yet, and then Azure Migrate as well to move that across. And some of those, when we think about the lift and shift motion, when we have there's an application in the scenario that's at a vendor support, it'll be the safest way to bring that across. Much like the question about COTS applications earlier, as well, as a way to modernise, get out of your data centre, but still have your application running in a as good a support as could be motion, even though they're not available to support it. But at least your business applications can execute and run. And then finally, the risks that we just saw a little while ago. We've got a major risk around our skills team and bandwidth that will need to be addressed. Uncertain financial costs, given they're already moving towards Azure, maybe less of an impact, but it's good to understand what options are available to them, such as the programs, such as AMP, and the assessment programs that we can use to understand what does that look like. There's also security compliance is another risk area that's probably worthwhile considering, based on things like the GDPRs, assuming that they've got those European customers, maybe, what other standards in there as well, or maybe even that workplace health and safety compliance need to achieve. So making sure that their information is protected and safe is part of that. So that was a really quick whiteboard that we use with clients when thinking about the path they need to go through to get there. And it starts, like we had in Data Journey Map, understanding what those transformation opportunities can include and the business outcomes we want to achieve. And then building a plan, getting narrowed focus. We focused on the migration motion, but we know also that these now set the scene to do things like reducing the time to delivery or improving our customer experience or helping our database administrator be more effective. And so there's a connection there between business decision strategy and outcomes to then implementing something that makes sense. So hopefully that was helpful to be able to show how we think about modernising our data estate. So Kate, I'm just going to work out how to stop sharing on this, and I'll just reshare the screen. But while I'm doing that, Marcel, just ask, is there any other questions that have come through from the audience at this stage?
No, there's no further questions.
Okay, fantastic. Well, in that case, I'm just going to put my screen back on again. We'll move on, and this I'll talk a bit more about how we're going for time, Marcel. We've got probably a little bit behind where we scheduled, but we're not too far.
We're a little bit behind.
10 minutes, and then we'll have a break.
Yes.
And I just wanted to capture this before we sort of then move into the probably the more exciting part for some. Move on to some of the lab pieces. And this is really just a quick overview around Data 3. If you're new to Data 3, I'm not going to elaborate long, and then some of the offers that are available as well to you. Okay. So Data 3, we've been in business for sorry.
Lab start 12:15.
12, yeah, so probably about 12:15 lab start. We've been in business for 40 years and operate in every state territory in Australia and do a lot of work, not only in, Joe and I work in a professional services business, but licensing, if you're a licensing customer, we also do hardware and people solutions, managed service, whole range of things there. In terms of our Microsoft expertise, Data 3 is one of 5 Azure expert MSPs in Australia and one of about 80 worldwide, which is the highest rating or certification you have with Microsoft. And it's really demonstrates a level of capability independently audited through a 68-step audit process. This is a blurb on that. But it really is a test of us, so everything from how we design, how we deliver, migration is a key part of this as well, how we support and securely manage client environments. And then that's digging deep into work we've done with clients as well. So we're one of the few in that case. In addition to that, including advanced specialization in SQL Server migrations, we also have capabilities in data analytics, data platform, cloud platform security, and DevOps, amongst others as well. So we're Microsoft partner for many years. Now we can help in a range of ways. You recall this diagram had before, and we just saw it in the whiteboard as well. What we obviously assist with is the modernisation migration to Azure. And the way we sort of start that off is through that data estate assessment, where we just that framework had on the screen before. We rerun through that in detail with you and help you understand what does that look like. And it doesn't have to be data. We can also do application level modernisation as well, if that's of interest, or just focus on the data estate if that's what you prefer. Also have an offering called Data Innovation Studio. I'll elaborate on that in a moment. That's really helpful for clients who don't know where to start. And you've all been, say, part of a data immersion experience, or we call that. So these Azure workshops, there is a way we help clients understand more about options available to them by taking you through and getting you involved, in this case, stay hands-on with some shortly with how we do the migration. And so the Data Studio, just to elaborate on this further, really stem from some of those challenges I showed you on the screen before around we don't have enough time, we don't have the skills, the bandwidth to do this, we don't know what the costs look like, and we've looked at Azure Calculator, but it doesn't make sense, or it's too expensive compared to what we think it is, and we just don't know where to start, which is one of the most common problems clients have. There's so many information available to you. How do I get started? So we grew the Data Innovation Studio on that basis, and it uses that data journey map that I've taken you through in the whiteboard session just then, and basically does a deep dive using that approach through a series of workshops involving business and technical stakeholders to understand what those organisational opportunities are and help elicit those from the various groups of people, and just define some business outcomes you're looking to achieve with your data. Understand your current processes and technology to make sure that anything that comes an outcome, supports where you are already operating and using, and as an extension and complements that rather than conflicts with it. And what we have at the output of that is a set of use cases, defines the transformation opportunities, adoption roadmap, over time show, well, here is the order of things and capabilities you should need to do based on where you're at, and that's different from client to client. Technical architecture, so we expand that modern day landscape and build out an architecture tied in with Microsoft reference architectures to help you show what's best in Azure. And what the economic investment looks like. So what would you need to expect to consume in Azure, and what services you would need or effort you need to invest from your side to be able to achieve that, as well as the skills and adoptions strategy to upskill, like the DBA we saw in our whiteboard. What would that person need to do to get confident in using cloud technologies? So to help start your journey, the offer for those who have registered for the webinar is a Data Studio Lite to build out your own data journey map. And the first 3 customers who respond to the contact link in the follow-up email before the end of the month, we'll run these sessions with you to go through an elaborated version of what you saw today in your context. And you can use if you aren't lucky enough to the first 3, you can use contact your data account manager. We'll use the link in the follow-up email, and happy to connect with you and chat further. Now we are. Yep, I think we're just about right. This slide is about 15 minutes out of date. I will update that in a moment, but we'll use this time now for a break. We'll grab a half an hour, because I think you've probably heard enough from me. What we'll do after the break, first we can check your lab environment is ready. If you have any issues, please just hit up the chat in Teams. I'll mute this session, but we'll keep the screen up here during the break. And when we come go then we will kick off. I'll guide you through, start the first exercise, and then let you sort of manage go at your own pace. Joe and I will be able to help shadow any of your sessions if you need help along the way. But we've both gone through it, and it's fun and bounceable, and it's a good way to understand what you've got options available to you. So with that. Is there anything else, Marcel, before?
No, we've seen that the majority of you have already entered into the lab, so we will see you again at 12:15.
Perfect.
AEST time. And as Pete said, if you have any issues with logging in, put your comments in the chat and we will solve that.
Perfect. Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you again soon.